The restaurant was louder than it needed to be. Soft jazz humming through hidden speakers, silverware clinking, glasses tapping as people leaned in too close to hear each other. Everyone looked dressed for a photo they hoped would last longer than the night. My mother had chosen the place. White tablecloths, dim lighting, the kind of spot where menus didn't list prices and nobody asked. New Year's Eve. I stood outside for a second before going in, smoothing the front of my dress, reminding myself to breathe. For some reason, I still thought this dinner meant something. That the invitation wasn't just about appearances. Inside, the table was already full. Champagne flutes caught the light. My brother was mid-laugh, leaning back in his chair like he owned the room. My father nodded along to a story I'd already heard 3 times growing up, smiling in that polite, distracted way. A couple of relatives I barely spoke to anymore glanced up when they saw me, then back to their conversations. My mom smiled when she saw me. Not a warm smile. The kind that stops at the eyes. "Jenna," she said, air-kissing my cheek. "You made it." I slid into the empty chair, tucked my coat under the table, and set my phone face down beside my plate. No one asked how work was. No one mentioned the traffic. Someone poured me champagne without asking, already moving on to the next glass. For a few minutes, it almost felt normal. Menus were opened. Orders were placed. Someone made a joke about resolutions. Laughter rolled across the table like a practiced reflex. I listened more than I spoke, nodding at the right moments, keeping my shoulders relaxed. Then, halfway through the first toast, my mom leaned toward me. Her perfume hit before her voice did. She tilted her head, lips barely moving, and whispered, almost sweetly, "We only invited you out of pity. Don't stay too long, okay?" For a second, I honestly thought I'd imagined it. The words didn't land right away. They hovered, like my brain was checking them against reality and coming up short. I turned my head slightly, just enough to see her face. She was smiling. Not apologetic. Not embarrassed. Amused. Something in my chest went tight, then strangely quiet. Across the table, my brother noticed my expression and snorted. "Well," he said loudly, raising his glass, "at least she showed up on time for once." A couple of people laughed. Someone added, "That's progress." I felt my ears burn, but my hand stayed steady. I lifted my glass, took a small sip, and let the cold settle in my throat. The conversation moved on without me, like nothing had happened. I sat there, listening to them talk about vacations, about plans, about how this year was going to be different. The irony almost made me smile. They had already decided who I was in their story. The punchline. The cautionary tale. The one they could invite without respecting. I didn't argue. I didn't correct anyone. I didn't explain myself. When the server came by to check on us, I smiled and said I was finished. "I've got an early morning," I added casually. My mom barely looked at me when I stood up. "Already," she said, like I just said I was stepping out to use the restroom. I slipped my coat on, placed my napkin on the table, and walked away while they were still laughing at something my brother said. The sound followed me through the restaurant, out the door, and into the cold night air. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, hands in my pockets, breathing in exhaust and winter. They thought I was leaving because I was embarrassed. They had no idea that was the moment I stopped pretending. And they definitely didn't know that everything they depended on was about to disappear. 1 week later, my phone wouldn't stop vibrating. I was sitting on the sagging couch in my apartment, the one I bought secondhand because it fit in my car, when the first call came in. My mom's name lit up the screen. I let it ring. It stopped. Started again. Stopped. Then again. By the third call, my laptop chimed. "Urgent notice account update statement available." I frowned and opened my email. Another notification slid in before the page fully loaded. Then another. My phone buzzed in my hand, heavy and insistent, like it was trying to crawl away from me. I didn't answer. I clicked into my banking app instead. Everything was exactly where it should be. Another call came through. This time, I picked up. "Jenna," my mom said, her voice already sharp with panic. "What did you do?" I leaned back against the couch cushion and stared at the rain streaking down my window. "What are you talking about?" I asked. "Don't react. Just listen." "The cabin," she said, rushing now. "There are people at Lake Chin. Strangers. They're saying they own it. They have paperwork. Your name is all over it. What did you do?" In the background, I could hear my dad. His voice was raised, clipped, bouncing off walls that suddenly didn't feel as solid as they used to. Before I could answer, she kept going. "The bank locked our joint accounts. Auto payments bounced. There are fees, Jenna. Fees. Your father is furious." Another call buzzed through. "Ryan." I pulled the phone away from my ear, watched his name flash, then declined it. My mom's breathing sounded uneven now. "Say something," she demanded. "You can't just do this." I stayed quiet for a moment longer than was polite. "Do what?" I asked calmly. She made a frustrated noise. "Don't play games. You know exactly what I'm talking about." "I really don't," I said. And that was the truth they couldn't stand. I ended the call before she could raise her voice again. Almost immediately, Ryan's text messages started coming in. Long ones. Angry blocks of words that filled my screen. "You tanked my credit score. Do you have any idea what that does to my clients? All because you couldn't take a joke?" I exhaled through my nose, a small laugh slipping out before I could stop it. A joke. That's what they were calling it now. Another message popped up. "We're family. You don't do this to family." I set the phone down beside me and stared at the ceiling. They were all asking the same question. "What did you do?" None of them had ever asked a different one. "How did this all end up on you?" The rain picked up outside, tapping against the window in uneven rhythms. I closed my eyes and let my head rest against the back of the couch. 1 week earlier, I'd walked out of that restaurant feeling hollow. Now, with my phone buzzing nonstop and my inbox filling with panic, I felt something else entirely. Clarity. Because this didn't start with a dinner. It started years ago, when being helpful slowly turned into being responsible. And they never noticed the difference. I didn't respond to any of them right away. Not my mom. Not my dad. Not Ryan. I stood up, walked into my tiny kitchen, and poured myself a glass of tap water. The pipes rattled like they always did, reminding me exactly where I was in life, a one-bedroom apartment, second-hand furniture, no safety net, no one swooping in to save me if I fell. Funny thing was, I'd been everyone else's net for years. I took a sip and leaned against the counter as my phone lit up again. This time, it was my dad. Martin. He rarely called me directly unless something had already gone very wrong. I let it ring out. Another email came in. Then another. Joint account closed, authorized signer removed, property transfer confirmed. My stomach stayed calm. My hands didn't shake. That surprised me. I walked back to the couch and finally opened the voicemail my mom had left. Her voice sounded thin, brittle, like glass about to crack. "Jenna, this isn't funny. If this is some kind of revenge, you've made your point. Call us back. We need to fix this before people find out. Before people find out. Not before we hurt you. Not before we crossed a line. Just before their image took a hit." Ryan's texts kept coming. "You always do this. You overreact and blow things up. You think you're so smart, but you're just spiteful." I muted the thread. Then I opened the folder on my laptop, the one I'd created months ago and never thought I'd actually use. Inside were PDFs, scanned documents, email chains, and bank authorizations with my name on them. All perfectly legal. All signed. All given freely back when I was responsible, and good with details, and the only one we trust to handle this stuff. The cabin. The accounts. The auto payments. I hadn't taken anything that wasn't already under my name. I had just stopped pretending it wasn't. My phone rang again. This time, I answered. What? I said. My dad didn't bother yelling. His voice was low, controlled, which somehow felt worse. You embarrassed us, he said. Do you know how this looks? I smiled, just a little. Like consequences, I replied. There was a pause. You don't get to punish us because your feelings were hurt, he said. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees. This isn't punishment, I said evenly. This is me stepping out of the role you assigned me without asking. Another pause. Longer this time. You wouldn't have any of that if it wasn't for us, he finally said. And there it was. The line they always used. I felt the last piece click into place. You're right, I said. Which is why I'm returning it to you. What does that mean? He snapped. It means I removed myself, I said. From the accounts. From the responsibilities. From fixing your messes. You can't just walk away, he said. I stood up, pacing now. I already did, I replied. Last week. At dinner. You just didn't believe me. The call ended abruptly. Not by me. I looked down at my phone and let out a slow breath. They were scrambling because the system only worked as long as I stayed silent, grateful, and small. And for the first time, I wasn't. The next 2 days felt surreal. I went to work like nothing had happened. 12-hour shifts. Beeping monitors. Families crying in hallways. Life and death playing out in front of me while my phone stayed face down in my locker, vibrating every few minutes like it was alive. During my lunch break, I finally checked it. 43 missed calls. Texts from relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. Your mom is devastated. You've gone too far. Family doesn't do this to family. Not one message asked why. Not one said, "Are you okay?" That told me everything. That night, when I got home, there was an email waiting for me from a lawyer. Not mine. Theirs. Subject line, request for immediate discussion. I laughed out loud. Real laughter. The kind that comes from disbelief. I opened it. They wanted to clarify ownership, resolve misunderstandings, and avoid unnecessary conflict. Translation, they wanted their safety net back. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened my banking app and confirmed what I already knew. The joint accounts were officially closed. The cabin at Lake Chin, the one I had co-signed for, managed, and quietly paid into when their finances got complicated, had been transferred and sold. The money wasn't sitting in my account. It had gone exactly where it was always supposed to go. Back to zero. No more invisible contributions. No more unpaid emotional labor. No more being the family's emergency fund. The next morning, my mom showed up at my apartment. I knew it was her before I even opened the door. She knocked the way she always did when she was angry, short, sharp, like the door had personally offended her. When I opened it, she looked smaller somehow. Her hair wasn't done. Her coat was thrown on like she hadn't planned this visit. We need to talk, she said, pushing past me. I didn't move. No, I replied. We don't. Her mouth fell open. She wasn't used to resistance. Especially not from me. You can't shut us out, she snapped. After everything we've done for you. I folded my arms. You invited me to dinner to humiliate me, I said calmly. You laughed. You let everyone laugh. She waved her hand like that part didn't matter. That was a joke. No, I said. That was the truth, said out loud. Her eyes flashed. You think you're better than us now, she demanded. I met her stare. No, I said. I think I'm done letting you feel better by putting me down. Silence stretched between us. Then she tried a different tactic. You're tearing this family apart, she said, voice breaking just enough to sound convincing. I took a step back and held the door open. I didn't tear it apart, I replied. I just stopped holding it together. She stood there for a long moment, searching my face for the old version of me. The one who apologized first. The one who fixed things. She didn't find her. Finally, she turned and walked away. And for the first time in my life, I closed the door without guilt. The fallout didn't come all at once. It came in waves. First, the family group chat went quiet. No more passive-aggressive jokes. No more holiday planning. Just silence, like everyone was waiting for someone else to make the first move. Then the stories started reaching me through people I barely knew. An aunt messaged me on Instagram. A cousin I hadn't spoken to since childhood sent a voice note. They're saying you stole from them. They're telling people you manipulated paperwork. Your mom's saying you ruined them on purpose. I listened. I thanked them. And I didn't defend myself. Because here's the thing no one tells you, when you stop being useful, the narrative changes fast. I was no longer the quiet one. I was no longer the responsible one. I was the villain. And they needed one. A week later, my brother Ryan tried again. This time, his message was shorter. We can fix this. Just transfer the money back. No apology. No acknowledgement of the dinner. No ownership. Just entitlement. I didn't respond. Instead, I did something I'd been putting off for years. I booked a consultation with a financial advisor for myself. Not for my parents. Not for my brother. Not for some imaginary family emergency. For me. We went through everything. My income. My savings. My credit. The damage I'd quietly absorbed while propping everyone else up. When he finished, he leaned back and said, "You know, you've been living like someone with nothing, while funding people who act like they're entitled to everything." That sentence hit harder than anything my family had said. I walked out of that office lighter. That night, I muted every family chat. Blocked a few numbers. Changed passwords. And then I slept. Deeply. For the first time in years. On New Year's Day, while everyone else was posting resolutions and champagne photos, I sat on my couch with a cup of coffee and watched the rain hit the window. No chaos. No emergencies. No one demanding explanations. Just quiet. 2 weeks later, I ran into my mom at the grocery store. She looked right through me. Didn't say hello. Didn't glare. Didn't pretend. She walked past me like I was a stranger. And weirdly, that was when I knew I'd won. Because I was no longer her resource. I was no longer her backup plan. I was just a person she couldn't control. And for the first time, that felt like freedom. Freedom didn't feel dramatic at first. It felt empty. The kind of empty that shows up after years of noise finally stop. No ringing phone. No urgent texts. No guilt disguised as concern. Just long stretches of quiet where I kept reaching for my phone out of habit, expecting another crisis that never came. That's when the grief hit. Not for the money. Not for the cabin. But for the version of family I had kept believing in. I grieved the idea that one day my mom would look at me with pride instead of amusement. That my brother would treat me like a sister instead of a safety net. That dinners wouldn't feel like auditions I kept failing. Letting go of that fantasy hurt more than walking out of the restaurant ever did. About a month later, the consequences started catching up to them in real ways. The cabin sale wasn't enough to cover everything. Without the joint accounts cushioning their spending, reality showed up fast. Late notices. Penalties. Awkward conversations with banks that didn't care about family dynamics or excuses. My dad emailed me. Not called. Not apologized. Just one sentence. We didn't realize how much you were doing. I stared at it for a long time. Because realization without accountability is just another way of avoiding responsibility. I didn't reply. Instead, I focused on rebuilding things I'd neglected while holding everyone else together. I took a weekend trip by myself for the first time in my life. I replaced the couch that sagged in the middle. I signed up for a class I'd always said I didn't have time for. Small things. Quiet wins. Then, one afternoon, my brother showed up at my apartment. Unannounced. He looked tired. Not angry. Not smug. Just smaller. I didn't think they'd fall apart this fast, he said. There it was. Not I'm sorry. Not we hurt you. Just shock that the system failed without me. I told him calmly, that's because it was never sustainable. It was just convenient. He asked if I could help again. Just temporarily. Just until things stabilized. I shook my head. No, I said. I already gave you my 20s. He left without another word. And for once, I didn't feel cruel. I felt clear. Because boundaries don't need to be loud. They just need to be final. If you've ever been the one holding everything together, you already know this truth. The moment you stop fixing things, people finally see the damage. And they'll blame you for it. But choosing yourself isn't betrayal. It's survival. And that was the moment I stopped being their joke. And started being my own priority. A strange thing happened after my brother left. Nothing. No explosions. No dramatic family collapse on my doorstep. No sudden realization speech from my mom. Just silence. And at first, that silence felt uncomfortable, like I was waiting for a storm that refused to arrive. I kept thinking, this is when they come back with apologies. This is when they realize they went too far. But days passed. Then weeks. And slowly, I understood something that hit harder than any insult at that restaurant. They didn't miss me. They missed what I provided. My mom stopped calling entirely. Not even angry voicemails anymore. Just, gone. My dad unfriended me on Facebook without a word, like that somehow erased the paper trail of years I'd kept them afloat. My brother blocked me for a while, then unblocked me, then blocked me again like he couldn't decide whether I was a villain or a lost resource. That's when the story started changing. Not in their house. In mine. I started sleeping through the night. Number 2 a.m. panic texts about bounced payments or emergencies that somehow always involved money. I stopped flinching every time my phone buzzed. My shoulders dropped for the first time in years. One afternoon, while cleaning out an old drawer, I found a folded receipt from years ago. A wire transfer confirmation. One of the first big ones. I remembered how proud I'd felt sending it, thinking this will finally make things better. I laughed. Not bitterly. Just, honestly. Because I finally saw it clearly. I was never investing in a relationship. I was subsidizing their comfort. Around that time, my aunt reached out. The same one who'd laughed at dinner. Her message was short. Your mom's having a rough time. You didn't need to be so extreme. Extreme. That word stuck with me. Not the mocking. Not the humiliation. Not the years of quiet dependence. My response was extreme. I typed out a reply, erased it, typed again, then finally sent just one sentence. I stopped participating in my own disrespect. She never replied. Then came the rumors. Apparently, I was unstable. Cold. Punishing the family over a joke. Funny how standing up for yourself always gets rewritten as cruelty by people who benefited from your silence. But here's what none of them saw. While they were scrambling, I was finally building. I paid off my own debts. I opened accounts in my name only. I started planning a future that didn't include cleaning up someone else's mess. One night, sitting alone with takeout and a movie I actually wanted to watch, I realized something that stopped me mid-bite. I wasn't angry anymore. And that scared me more than rage ever did. Because anger means you still care. What I felt instead was distance. And distance, once it settles in, doesn't reverse easily. That was when I knew this wasn't just a pause. It was an ending forming quietly in the background. And the part of the story where they expected me to come back? That part was already over. The call came on a Tuesday morning. Not from my mom. Not from my brother. From the bank. I was in the middle of making coffee, standing barefoot on my kitchen floor, when my phone lit up with an unfamiliar number. Normally, I would have let it go to voicemail. Old habits die hard. But something told me to answer. Hi, this is Laura from Northwest Credit Services. I'm calling regarding several joint accounts that were recently closed. Her tone was polite. Professional. Careful. I leaned against the counter and waited. She continued, we've received multiple requests from the other account holders asking to reverse the closures. They're claiming the action was taken without their understanding of the consequences. I almost laughed. Understanding had never been their priority. I'm the primary holder, I said evenly. Everything was done correctly. There was a pause, just long enough to tell me she was reading notes. Yes, she replied. That's what our records show. I just needed to confirm whether you'd like to authorize any reinstatement. Authorize. That word felt heavier than it should have. This was the moment they expected. The one where I felt guilty. Where I softened. Where I fixed it like I always had. I looked around my apartment. The quiet. The stability. The absence of chaos. No, I said. I don't authorize anything. Understood, she replied. I'll note that. The call ended. 10 minutes later, my phone started vibrating again. My mom. Then my dad. Then my brother. Back to back. I didn't answer. Instead, my mom left a voicemail. Her voice was sharp at first, clipped and controlled, like she was still trying to manage the situation. Jenna, this has gone far enough. Call me back immediately. We need to fix this. The next voicemail came 5 minutes later. The control was gone. Do you have any idea what you've done? She cried. Your father can't sleep. The cabin, our future, Jenna, you can't just destroy everything like this. Destroy. I listened to the message twice. They called it destruction because it was happening to them. When I didn't call back, my brother tried a different approach. His text came in long and dramatic. You think you're teaching us a lesson? All you've done is prove you were never really family. Family doesn't do this to each other. I stared at the screen, then placed the phone face down on the table. Family. Family doesn't invite you to dinner to humiliate you. Family doesn't turn you into a punchline. Family doesn't live comfortably on your support and call you a failure for it. That night, I finally did something I had never done before. I blocked them. Not temporarily. Not just until things calmed down. I blocked their numbers. Their emails. Their social media. The silence that followed wasn't heavy this time. It was clean. Days passed. No new crises. No guilt-tripping messages sneaking through. Just my life, unfolding without commentary. I went for walks without my phone glued to my hand. I made plans without worrying about sudden financial emergencies. I slept deeper than I had in years. And then, about a month later, I ran into my dad at the grocery store. He looked older. Smaller. For a moment, we just stared at each other between the cereal aisle and the frozen foods. Finally, he said my name. Not angry. Not pleading. Just tired. You didn't have to cut us off completely. I met his eyes and answered calmly. I didn't cut you off. I stopped being the only one holding everything up. He didn't argue. He just nodded once. That was the closest thing to acknowledgement I ever got. And strangely enough, it was enough. Because I had already made peace with the truth. They lost money. I gained myself. A few weeks after I ran into my dad at the grocery store, the last thread finally snapped. It wasn't dramatic. There was no final screaming phone call. No apology tour. No sudden realization on their part. Just reality catching up. Word traveled back to me through a cousin I still talked to occasionally. The cabin at Lake Chin was officially gone. Not temporarily inaccessible. Not tied up in paperwork. Sold. The proceeds barely covered the penalties and overdue balances they'd been juggling behind the scenes. The rest disappeared into the kind of quiet debt no one likes to admit exists. My brother moved back in with my parents after a deal he'd been bragging about fell through. Turns out clients don't love instability when your credit starts wobbling. My mom stopped posting curated family photos online. No more champagne dinners. No more matching outfits. No more captions about how blessed she was. The image cracked when the money did. As for me, nothing exploded. My life didn't suddenly turn perfect. I didn't wake up rich or famous or vindicated in the way movies like to show. What I woke up to was space. Space to plan without fear. Space to breathe without waiting for the next emergency. Space to stop proving my worth with bank statements. I stayed in Seattle. I upgraded to a better apartment, not flashy, just peaceful. I stopped apologizing for leaving events early. I stopped explaining myself to people who never listened anyway. The most surprising part? I didn't miss them the way I thought I would. I missed the idea of a family that never actually existed. On the anniversary of that New Year's dinner, I went back to the same restaurant alone. I ordered the same drink. Sat at a table by the window. And this time, no one laughed at me. No one needed to. Because I finally understood something they never would. They thought money was power. They were wrong. Power was knowing when to walk away and never coming back to beg.